What's up, guys? PDC here, and we are back with another part of the Pokemon Guide to Competitive Battling, the complete guide. And it's been a while since the last episode. I was trying to figure out a coherent schedule for this thing, and I've been back in college, which kind of delayed my uploads. So hopefully we'll get this back on track. I'm still planning on doing maybe an episode a week. So I keep this pretty structured and I keep it, at a quality output. But this time we're going to be doing team building. And we're not going to be doing team building in Sun and Moon. We're not going to be doing team building in a specific gen. We're just going to tackle the idea of team building and what it means to team build and how do you team build, because I feel like a lot of guides appear like on YouTube, which are like, this is how you team build in this specific metagame. And while that's helpful, it's not incredibly useful, because if it's only based around that metagame, yes, you can take, you can have takeaways of things like you need a sweeper, you need a defensive threat, you need a XYZ, whatever. While it's very true, you can, derive things like that from a video, which bases itself on a specific metagame. Overall, I think it's more useful to apply the broad strokes that will help you in literally any gen, and except for maybe like Gen 1, which I have no experience building in the slightest. At any rate, I think that it's more important to have a concrete video in team building that is about everything than about just nuanced metagame or generation, because the 1 second a video may be incredibly relevant in how to team build, and the next time it's outdated, old, and you can't recognize any of the sets or the teams in it anymore as even being viable. So what I'm going to be doing in this video is explaining how you team build. I'm not exactly the most well-known team builder, although I have team built in a lot of generations. I've team built for a lot of tournaments. I've team built for other people. I could give a list of examples of teams that I built that have been used in big tournaments with other players, primarily DPP, and Smogon Tour as well, but I know what I'm doing. I just don't like building because, as it stands, I am a perfectionist, and I find it very hard to have a satisfiable product for me. Something that is, I'm like, okay, this is what I want to use, and it takes me a long time to even figure out a team. But hopefully you guys don't have the problem, and we're going to hopefully alleviate, any questions or concerns or, anything like that, the basics of team building in this video. So let's begin. The first thing you need to know about team building is something called synergy. Synergy is a word you've probably heard thrown around pretty often. It's a pretty common buzzword in competitive Pokemon. And what it means is, at least in the competitive Pokemon sense, I'm sure you know what synergy means naturally, and they basically mean the same thing. Working well together. Things that go together. There's a big connection between these two. And for the cases of Pokemon, synergy exists in two primary forms. Defensive synergy and offensive synergy. Offensive synergy is having, say, a wall breaker and a sweeper, or a sweeper plus a lure, something that offensively works together. To have, any example. An example would be in DPP, a Shuka Jirachi with Icy Wind and like a DD Knight, something like that, to lure out a Scarfgone. Or you could have an ADV. You could have a Pokemon with HP Grass, and then you have a Pokemon which like Swampert being weakened, like HP Grass, Debitar, and Metagross. In Black and White, you could have something like Terrakion with Rock Gem, and then partner that with an Excadrill. That's offensive synergy because Excadrill is being helped by the Terrakion in killing Gliscor and Lando. In Gen 6, you have things like Tornadus T or Rotom Wash plus Medicham, Volt switching out. That's offensive synergy because it gets Medicham in and it brings in Pokemon that Medicham likes to punch out. And in Gen 7, well, you have things like, CB Zygarde plus Mons that weaken or help weaken Lando. So you could have a Medicham with a Zygarde, or you could have, a lure, something with HP Ice, or a Lopunny, or something else that weakens physical walls that Zygarde doesn't like, or a Pokemon like Mawile, which kills or can switch into things like Tapu Bulu. Offensive synergy is broad because it can be applied to things like momentum, hazards, anything like that. Offensive synergy is the key to teams that basically want to win through a means other than stalling. Offensive synergy is one of the first things you'll learn. It's one of the first things I learned when I was trying to team build back in the day. I was taught by Reverb back in 2010, and offensive synergy is one of those timeless concepts of the game, as is its counterpart, defensive synergy. Defensive synergy is just type synergy. Defensive synergy can also be like walls, like Skarmory is probably the best example. I'm sure you guys have heard that phrase. Pokemon that defensively work together through either type or through this thing walls that and this thing walls that, because I get beat by that, so I should put a Pokemon that walls that on my team. Defensive synergy is present on all teams. Essentially, every team has a form of this sense of defensive synergy because every team usually has a resistance to a type. Unless you're bringing a team with no steel, or no fairy, and you don't have a dragon resist, or you literally are just clicking random Pokemon that have no connection at all, chances are you'll have natural defensive synergy. Just covering the type chart is defensive synergy. And you have to understand these concepts because when you're trying to build a team, you usually come up with an idea, a basic, formula, something that you want to build around. And you can't just come up with an idea by, you can come up with an idea by thinking of it, but you can't come up with a team without really thinking through the motions, thinking through the next Pokemon, the next step. Why am I putting this Pokemon on the team? And that's what team building is really all about. It's being creative, but being logical. It's thinking about what the best possible option is that helps my previous members or help me achieve a certain goal. So in Gen 7, this is probably the gen which is most of you are going to be familiar with. So I'm going to be doing most of the examples in this generation, but I'll also sprinkle other examples from other generations as well. I don't plan for this to be a very long video, but I feel like it's important to get concepts down. You have different components and different slots and different types of Pokemon on your team. In Gen 7, I'm sure you guys all know this, but you have things like walls, which is like Chansey. These are Pokemon that fulfill specific roles. They function in specific ways, which usually are used to meet, means to an end. Chansey, it's a special wall. It functions as the glue to pretty much any defensive stall team. Then you have Pokemon like, Skarmory, which complement it. Or, Celesteela is also a wall when it's a bulky defensive set. You can have walls in things like, I'm trying to look here, Sableye. Sableye can be technically a wall. Scizor, when it's fully defensive, is also technically a wall, although it's a wall which can gain momentum. You can have things like Tapu Fini or Venusaur Mega. These Pokemon are walls. So is Tangrowth. They have offensive capabilities because a wall doesn't mean it just sits there and does nothing. But the primary function of these Pokemon, Toxapex is another great example, is to wall. The primary function of these things is to block threats. That's the main operation that these things are going to be fulfilling. That's just what they do. It's the role they fulfill. And walls, you're not going to see them incredibly frequently. It's not like walls are just slapped on teams without any, method. Because walls exist because, they exist because they fulfill a certain role in a specific team. Just patching random walls isn't a very good way to build a team. Because you've probably never seen a successful team which has a formula like wall, wall, offensive sweeper, Scarfer, wall, wall, wall. It doesn't work that way. This is why you can't just have, random Chansey offense, because while it's a team that works, it's mostly matchup based and not very effective. So what other types of roles do you have? Outside of the wall, well, you have sweepers. You can have a sweeper like Charizard X, which is Dragon Dance. Clefable can be a sweeper because it has Calm Mind. Something like Garchomp can be a sweeper with Swords Dance. A Landorus can be a sweeper with Rock Polish, SD, and, a Z-move. A Pokemon like Kyurem, not Kyurem Black. Kyurem Black is not really a sweeper, it's more of a wall breaker. Something like SD Scizor can be a sweeper. Something like Combine Coco can be a sweeper. A sweeper is something which usually through methods of upping its stats through Swords Dance or Dragon Dance or Agility or Combine or Rock Polish or something like that seeks to sweep a team. Or at the very least punch holes in it and open itself up to another sweeper. Sweepers are usually associated with the late game of a team. They're usually based upon like, okay, well, it's the end of the road here. I've already cleaned enough holes, because sweepers, especially offensive ones, are not always going to get that second chance. They're not always going to be able to, sweep multiple times, get what they need to get done more than once, especially for Pokemon which are known as sweepers, which lack reliable recovery. You're very rarely going to see a Lando manage to set up twice in one game. It's not going to happen. Landorus is basically built around, the idea that its walls are broken, Skarmory and other Lando are weakened or dead, and then it can actually act out upon its role. Another example of a role is something like a Wall Breaker, or a Mix Sweeper, or something like that. I feel like a lot of these names are interchangeable, and they're more identifiable by the specific mon than the actual terminology nowadays. Something like a Wall Breaker is something that works to break down walls. It's not essentially a sweeper, but it's one of the main things people use to help destroy stall teams. Because an offensive team, even if it has like 6 sweepers, is no guarantee to beat stall, because having this set up in its own self is a burden. And your opponent knows you have to set up to actually reach an end game or an end goal. So a Wall Breaker. What is that? A Mix Sweeper, what is that? Well, an example of a Wall Breaker could be something like Taunt Tornadus T. It can taunt things, it can use Z Hurricane, it can use Superpower, and it can use Defog. Combine Subcombine Kelvio is another example of a Wall Breaker, because that one annoys the hell out of certain stall teams across many generations, although less so in this one because of Toxapex. Something like Taunt Gyarados is a sweeper. It's a sweeper, and it can also be a Wall Breaker, because, like I said, some of these names are interchangeable. Taunt, Sub, stuff like that can be used to break down walls. Mawile is a Wall Breaker with 4 attacks, but it can also double as a sweeper. Like I said, these roles are not exclusive. They can be multiple things. You can have a sweeper which is a Wall Breaker. And you can have a Wall Breaker which is technically a sweeper. Although, not usually, but more often than not, you'll see that there's a bit of a difference between these roles here and there, depending on teams. For example, maybe in a specific game, you want to use Mawile as a Swords Dance sweeper, or maybe in another specific game, you want to use it as a Wall Breaker with just 4 attacks. Or maybe you just want to forego Swords Dance completely and just focus on your 3 moves that you already have in a specific game, because setting up is suboptimal. These are some of the core roles you'll see that I think are pretty identifiable for all of you. Of course, walls, stuff like that, glue Pokemon, choice Scarfers, Lando T. You'll see a lot of Pokemon, having to fill a specific role as Scarfers. Scarf Kartana, Scarf Magearna, Scarf Gengar, Scarf Kelvio. Mons like these, which fill a specific role based on the item they have. The Choice Scarf. They are revenge killers. This is another role. And for what it's worth, these roles are incredibly expansive. It's very hard to name every specific nuanced role there is in Pokemon, because you can have a Choice Specs Wall Breaker, a Band Wall Breaker. You can even have technically a Choice Scarf Cleaner, a cleaner Pokemon like Kartana, which has Beast Boost. A lot of these terms are interchangeable, but the more you play and the more you understand them, the better you'll get at using them yourself. And identifying them is not going to be hard, because once you know what a Pokemon does, you don't even need to attach that specific terminology to it. You'll just know what it is based on what it's trying to achieve. And you don't even need to attach the specific name to it. You just know what its goal is. So you have things like roles like sweepers, Wall Breakers, walls, mixed walls, cleaners, choice Scarfers. Things like this, Pokemon that set up hazards, dedicated leads, dedicated hazard setters, defoggers. All this terminology and all these roles are some of them are pretty obvious. You know what sets up, rocks, your rocker, your defogger. Those names are given to them by the move that they use and the role they fulfill for that team. That much is obvious. Then, once you know all these roles, you can actually start building. Combining what I said earlier with synergy and roles and which Pokemon work together is very important. When building a team, you have to focus on some fundamentals. You start with an idea. Well, let's say we want to start with something like, I don't know, we'll go with Charizard X. I'm not really current with building, and I didn't plan this very heavily before, but if you know what Charizard X does, you know that it wants something like, Lando Tigon, or Fast Scarfer's Dead. So you want a Pokemon which can beat out or weaken Landorus Therian. So what Pokemon do that? What Pokemon help achieve the goal of weakening Lando? Well, for one, you have something like CBT-Tar. CBT-Tar is a good partner for Charizard because it helps weaken Lando, or annoy other physical walls like Toxapex. Then you need something like a Ground Resist, so you put in Landorus Therian. You're combining the aspect of defensive synergy and offensive synergy. And just because it's more offensively based of a team, that doesn't mean you forego type synergy or something like that. Maybe you want a Tapu Bulu now, because you need defensive synergy, because you need somebody to take water attacks. And you need a steel type, and you also maybe weak the special sweepers, so you throw Magearna on there. Now, of course, this is not a real viable team, but it's just an example of how you can combine components. In Gen 7, it's all about team selection. And being a strong team builder will definitely help you achieve this goal. For what it's worth, team building in tournaments is a lot different from team building on a ladder, and I'll get to that later. But for the most part, most of you guys who are watching this video probably just want to get the fundamentals down. You want to learn how to combine utilities, roles, and stuff like that. Other examples of a team, based around an idea. Let's say you want to build around SD Kartana. Well, what beats SD Kartana? With Z-Fight, Fight EMZ. Celesteela is annoying. That's one Pokemon. If there's any unaware Pokemon that's annoying, Scizor is annoying. Celesteela, Scizor. Venusaur is annoying. So maybe you want to pair a Pokemon that eliminates Celesteela, Scizor, and Venusaur. Maybe a Heatran. A Heatran's not a terrible partner. Or maybe you want to put a Kyurem Black, because Kyurem Black is really annoying for defensive-based teams, and it's nice to have a Mum, which helps wall break. Or maybe you want something like a Latios, something that can trick Steel types, or HP Fire them, or lure them out. Or can switch into something like Venusaur. The endless possibilities you have in a game like Pokemon is really to your advantage here. You have a lot of combinations, a lot of specific builds, a lot of roles, and learning how to apply them is very useful. Now we're going to switch gears a bit, and we are going to go to an earlier gen. We're going to go out to let's say Gen 5. We're just going to be going through some random gens. Actually, we'll start with Gen 6 because I want to go top down. Starting with Gen 6, you can apply the same basic things, because the concept of offensive, defensive synergy, and roles working together, and Pokemon teams building off of each other is the same thing. The end game for your team, and this is the important part, is to function coherently. Sometimes you'll play a team and it just won't work because the Pokemon on it are not really fitting. They don't go well together. That's probably the easiest way to explain it without giving a detailed explanation of why something doesn't work together with something else. Maybe you're relying too much on something to cover your ass against so many threats. Maybe this Pokemon just doesn't work because it doesn't have the team support it needs to function. Maybe you lack all these things and you're really just throwing random Pokemon, or maybe you're only serving the type weakness chart and you lack offensive synergy. There are so many causes for a team not functioning properly. And that's why, for a lot of new players, they really, really struggle, because while in the day of YouTube, it's kind of easy to steal a decent team from one of your favorite PokeTubers, but for the most part, people do want to build their own shit. That's just a fact. People want to have their own teams that they themselves make. That's just how it is. People want to make their own stuff. So, that's why it's really important you get these basics down, because for new players, I have experience with people who are absolutely brand new in the metagame, and they just don't know how to build at all. They don't know where to start because, it's pretty easy to say, well, this Pokemon's weak to this, and I should put it with this, but that's only very shallow and surface level reasoning. To have a very good team, or even just a usable team, you have to have functionality at a higher level than the type chart. Or you have to have higher level functionality than just that, well, this breaks this for this, because just throwing sweepers on and Pokemon that work together isn't always going to work either. So let's give this example in Gen 6. Charizard Mega Y, Mega Charizard Y. What works with Zard? Well, what's it weak to? Rocks, so you want to put a spinner on it or a defogger. So let's put Latios on the team. You need a rock resist. You need somebody to take care of Lando. So why don't we put a Powdon on the team? You need a dark resist, something that can help these Pokemon tank things like CB Weavile. So maybe put a steel type on the team. Something like what beats something like Clefable, something that can switch into Weavile. You need a Choice Scarfer. Well, you can make Latios Choice Scarf for one, although that's not a very good Scarfer if you're relying on Defog. Just put a random, let's see, what works together well in a team? Some Choice Scarfer that functions well. You could put maybe Choice Scarf Lando. You could technically put Choice Scarf Keldeo. You could put a lot of different Pokemon on a team like this. It's a relatively structural build, which is pretty similar to the way it functions, but for the most part, you have at least some roles which you can overlap. Maybe a team like this doesn't even need a Choice Scarfer. Maybe you can just throw Weavile on it because that has CB Ice Shard and you can pursue things like Latios for Charizard Y. You can go back and forth between defensive and offensive synergy, and then maybe you want Ferrothorn at the end for spikes and more water coverage. That's a team that's viable right there, and you see how I combined offensive and defensive synergy. Defensive synergy between Charizard Y, Latios, and a Powdon, and offensive synergy between Charizard, Weavile, and Latios, all the same. Let's do another example in Gen 5. Let's say you want to build around Calm Mind Keldeo. What's walling Keldeo? Or at least threatening Keldeo? Latios. So you put a Tyranitar on your team because Tyranitar pursues Latios. Well, you need a ground resist now. You need something that can cover your ass against any Landorus Therian, any Pokemon that spams ground moves. So you could either put a Lando of your own on your team, or maybe you want to put something like a Slowbro. Or you could even put a Skarmory on your team and use Spike support, because Keldeo with Spikes is really useful. You could have something like a Latios on your team now, because you need a Keldeo counter of your own. A team like this can function, because Keldeo and Skarmory actually have a form of offensive synergy in that Skarmory provides hazard support for Keldeo. And Tyranitar has offensive synergy with Keldeo because it pursues Latios. Teams like this, in all generations, function similarly. In Gen 4, you can have, let's say you want to build around Calm Mind Jirachi. Well, what do you need to get rid of if you want Calm Mind Jirachi to function? Things like Heatran, things like Infernape, things like strong ground types like Flygon or Powdon or Tyranitar. So what functions well with Jirachi then? Well, if you want to switch into strong ground types and Tyranitar, maybe you want to put a Breloom on your team. Or maybe you want to put a Gyarados on your team which can switch into Heatran. Or maybe you want to put a Kingdra on your team. These three look fine because now you have a Fire type and a Tyranitar switch for Calm Mind Jirachi. You need a better ground resist, then you can put on something like Gengar, which can even explode on certain special walls. Now, while this isn't exactly an incredibly coherent team, it functions, because these are examples of roles that you can use on a team and how you can combine them to have a successful product. I'll stop at Gen 3 because that's probably where most of you are... that's probably where most of you guys, the drop-off in knowledge occurs. So in Gen 3, let's say you want to run a team around DD Salamence. Well, you can run Magneton with it, because Magneton traps Skarmory and prevents spikes. Maybe with Magneton and Salamence, well, you need a better Croon switch, so maybe you want to run Celebi. Or maybe you want to run Dugtrio then, because Combine Celebi functions well with these two trappers. And then you can even run something like Snorlax, and then you can run something like Melodic, because you need defensive synergy against things like Salamence, opposing Salamence, or opposing water types, or Starmie, or Tyranitar. Offensive synergy between Salamence and Magneton, Salamence and Dugtrio, Celebi and Magneton and Celebi and Dugtrio, Snorlax and Dugtrio and Snorlax and Magneton. And then Melodic functions well with all of them because it acts as a glue to the team, covering threats, providing another water resist, providing a way to toxic and enforce rest on Croons. And it also benefits from being able to switch in more often because Magneton helps trap spikers like Skarmory. You see how it all lines up, in that there is defensive and offensive synergy present in every gen. These are the core tenets of Pokemon building. Throughout all these teams, quote-unquote teams that we built, they are all following a similar path. Building things using principles that are present in the game itself. The faces may change, but the ideas of defensive synergy, offensive synergy, roles, combining Pokemon that work together, all of these are eternal. As long as Pokemon remains a 6 Pokemon game where you have 6 Mons, 4 moves, an item, abilities, and stuff like that, you're going to have these principles. Until battling changes from what it's been for the past 20 years, these concepts of having offensive synergy, defensive synergy, roles, functionality in the team based on these roles, and overall cohesiveness, these concepts will help you in any metagame. And while this may be a kind of rushed guide, this is what you need to know. And this is how you can play this game. This is how you get better. Because people who just start playing don't understand there's more to building a team than just throwing the strongest Pokemon with the highest base stats. It has to function as a cohesive block. And people don't always get that. And that is the first step to getting better. Knowing how to build. Because building leads to our next concept. Building, understanding a metagame, knowing why Pokemon are in certain places on a team, is the first building block, the first step to something that I like to call metagame analysis. Which after team building, if we apply another video to this concept, which we might, will be the next topic I cover. Because metagame analysis and team building and overall familiarity with the metagame go hand in hand. And with that, the first team building video is done. So thank you guys all for watching. I hope you all enjoyed this video. Subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.